All right. Also, when it comes to working with configurations, this last item here is minimizing using iParts and iAssemblies. What do you mean by that, Tom? Minimize them, but what about the power of iParts and iAssemblies? Well, there is a lot of power involved with working with iParts and iAssemblies. However, with iParts and iAssemblies, they can be taken too far. I have worked with companies where they'll have an iAssembly that has a series of sub-iAssemblies involved, and those sub-iAssemblies have different iParts involved. So how Inventor works is if you go and change one of those iAssemblies or even one of those iParts, it recalculates the entire assembly. So if you have 20 iAssemblies and those 20 iAssemblies have a series of sub-iAssemblies and those sub-iAssemblies have numerous iParts associated to them, that's a lot of calculation and recalculation Inventor has to do. And I've seen instances where performance is severely impacted to the point where designers and engineers are sitting for minutes, tens of minutes sometimes, up to even half hour, waiting for Inventor to recompute and resolve a simple little change. So how did we address this? Well, minimize. Obviously, iParts are important. Obviously, iAssemblies are valuable. However, there is a limit. There is a threshold that we need to be cognizant of and try not to overwhelm ourselves with something that is good. You know, too much of a good thing can always be bad. So that is the exact case in point here with iParts and iAssemblies. In my assembly here, I have a couple of iParts. These blocks here, these bushing blocks, are very important. So obviously, I want to make sure that I use those as iParts because, once again, I'm not in control of that design. However, I want to be able to leverage different sizes of those. So fasteners are great examples of iParts. You know, bearing blocks like this are really good examples of that, but you want to try to minimize them. Within iLogic, there is a way for us to be able to leverage iParts. If those of you that are familiar with using iLogic, which we will be covering later on in this series, but there is a specific section for working specifically with iParts. So I don't necessarily suggest not using them whatsoever, but once again, let's try to minimize how they're being used, simply because if we're already going down the path of creating logic and developing configurations based upon condition, iParts really are the same thing. You know, we can change the configuration of an iPart by assigning a condition and changing the row of that iPart. So we can do the same thing by leveraging my workflow that I have shown here previously. If the parts are in the library and we have business logic to understand that condition, we can swap out those individual components as necessary without too much of a complication. So it basically does the same thing as iParts. It's just a different method to get there, a different path to get there. So once again, I cannot reiterate it enough. Minimize using iParts and iAssemblies. However, understand when it's appropriate to use them and when it's valuable to use them.